welcome to Spooked with Emma. I'm Emma and this is part 8 of the last 6 days. There are 12 parts altogether, so if you enjoy this, please subscribe so you don't miss anything. And if you want to buy the paperback or the ebook, the links to buy those are in the description below. We were shown to a table upstairs, which was on a kind of mezzanine looking down over the rest of the restaurant. It was a fairly small place and very cute. It had old-fashioned wooden chairs, all the tables had blue and white checked tablecloths, and there were blue and white tiles on the walls. I loved places like this. It almost reminded me of a French bistro, except the fans hanging from the walls made it obvious we were in Spain. Julian asked if I'd like him to order for me, and for some reason I said yes. I don't know why, I usually get a bit funny about men ordering for me. I had a bad experience at university when a guy I met in the gym took me out to a Moroccan restaurant on a date and ordered tap water and one main course between us to share. I like to think that I'm not a snob, and I get that not everyone's dad is on the rich list. But he insisted he was going to pay for everything, even though I had said I was happy to pay half, so if he didn't have the money then maybe he should have just invited me out for a drink or coffee, or even just a walk rather than dinner. It was just awkward, and then he made it a million times worse by complaining to the waiter that there wasn't enough food. If that had been the worst part, it wouldn't have been so bad, but the fact that every time he spoke to the waiter he put on a fake Moroccan accent and called him Habib made it one of the most embarrassing nights of my life, and definitely one of the worst dates I've ever been on. Anyway, for some reason with Julian I didn't mind. I guess I instinctively trusted him, and anyway the alternative was looking at a menu in Spanish and ordering something at random, so either way I wouldn't really be choosing for myself. The waitress came over and he spoke to her in rapid Spanish, and then as soon as she had gone he started talking to me in English again. I was amazed at how he could just switch from one language to the other so effortlessly. I asked him why his English was so good, and he told me that he'd learned English as a child, but that he was more interested in finding out about me. He asked me how I'd ended up in Madrid, and even though I usually follow the standard rule of never talking about ex-boyfriends on a first date, for some reason I found myself telling him all about Ben and how he'd broken up with me, and I even for some reason told him about the time Ben hit me when he said that I'd embarrassed him in front of a director at a party, and he thought that because of that, he had missed out on getting a part he'd wanted. I'd never told anyone that before ever in my life. Even with Ben, we'd never talked about it or even acknowledged that it had happened. It was almost as I wasn't in control of what I was saying and everything was just spilling out of me, not just emotions I'd been keeping inside for the past few days, but for years. The starter arrived and Julian explained that it was pumpkin soup, but cold like gazpacho, with a scoop of cold mashed potato and sweet corn. It sounded disgusting and I was slightly regretting agreeing to Julian ordering, but he must have seen my face and told me to trust him and that I would love it. And I did. It was one of the most delicious things I'd ever eaten. I could hardly believe it. I told him it was amazing and he just smiled. He said that I had to promise that from now on I wouldn't doubt him again, and I promised. I felt like I'd been talking so much and I still didn't know anything about him at all, even what his job was, so I asked him what he did for a living. He told me that he had his own business, but before I could ask him any more about it, the main course arrived. It was rice, plantain, ratatouille, fried egg and salad. Julian said it was a Cuban dish. I've been to Cuban restaurants before in London and New York, and I always thought Cuban food was mainly meat and seafood, but this was wonderful. Julian had made a brilliant choice again, and I decided that I really ought to trust him like he said. I didn't want to tell Julian about the ghosts, but he asked me whether I was planning to stay in Madrid for long, and I just burst into tears at the table. I've never been a particularly emotional person, and certainly crying in the middle of a restaurant on a first date with a man I've known for an hour is not my usual style, but everything felt different with Julian. He had some kind of effect on me, and I felt not just that I could tell him anything, but that I wasn't capable of hiding anything from him at all. He didn't even seem surprised that I was crying. Nothing seemed to surprise him. He just reached over and put his hand on top of mine, and I realised it was the first time that anyone had touched me since I'd been here. He had a concerned look on his face, and I thought that maybe at last someone here actually cared about me. He asked me what was wrong, and I told him that he wouldn't believe me if I told him, and he'd think I was crazy. And he told me that I'd promised to trust him, and he promised to believe me too. So I told him everything, the luggage being thrown around, the crying in the night, the notebook sleeping on the street, the cryptic message on the wall, all of it. I thought he'd laugh, or just get up and walk straight out of the restaurant. but he looked me straight in the eye with those piercing blue eyes of his and told me he believed me. I thought he must be joking, but the way he was looking at me told me he was serious. I told him I was surprised that anyone could believe it because I wouldn't have believed it myself a week ago, and I asked him why he was so sure I was telling the truth. He held my gaze and said, "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy." I'd never been on a date before with a man who quoted Shakespeare to me, let alone when English wasn't even his first language, and I found it ridiculously romantic. I was elated that after going through all of these horrors alone, finally someone was listening to me and understood. And when that someone just happened to be a gorgeous and intelligent man who seemed to really like me, even better. It was beyond a dream, and when I remembered how awful I had felt just the day before, it seemed unbelievable. He asked me if I needed to go back to the apartment to get my things, since I'd told him how I'd rushed out the night before with hardly anything. But I said no, I never wanted to go back there. I just wanted to pretend I'd never been there at all. And if whoever cleaned the apartment for the next unfortunate tenant wanted to take my clothes, then that was fine with me. Then I remembered the notebooks, and I thought that maybe Julian could tell me what they meant. But I told myself that they didn't matter now, and I just needed to leave all of that behind me. He must have been able to tell that something was on my mind, because he asked me what was wrong. I told him, I just couldn't seem to stop myself, and he said that of course he would tell me what they meant if it would give me some kind of closure, and asked whether I would feel okay about going back to the apartment if he was with me. He promised that no ghost would harm me if he was there. I believed him. I don't know why, but I should have trusted my instincts and never come back here. I just thought to myself that maybe it would be fine if he was with me, because I wouldn't be scared. And if I wasn't scared, then those ghosts couldn't have any power over me. I said yes, but that I wasn't sure I was ready to go back there yet, and he smiled and said that was fine because we still hadn't had dessert. It wasn't even funny, but it made me laugh just because he was so charming. I couldn't even remember the last time I'd laughed so much. I felt like I was really letting go at last, and that maybe I was going to enjoy Madrid after all. The waitress brought our desserts, and when she put my plate down, she looked at Julian and then caught my eye and gave me a knowing smile. He was a very good-looking man, so it wasn't surprising that we were attracting attention. The dessert was layers of pastry and ricotta cheese with red berries and honey, and it was so lovely that I thought I would try and make it myself at some point. Julian didn't seem surprised when I told him I was very impressed by his choice of restaurant. He asked if I was ready to go back to the apartment, and I said I wasn't sure. He told me not to worry because he would be with me, and I thought that he was right and that I didn't need to worry if he was there. He also said that it was better that we went now, in the daytime, so that we could be gone before it got dark, since that was when anything strange might happen. It seemed to make sense. I still wasn't sure I wanted to go back again, but at least this way I could pick up the notebooks and find out what they said. Julian left some cash on the table to cover the bill, and then we left the restaurant and walked out into the sunshine. We took a different route from the way we'd come, walking uphill on tiny back streets until we suddenly arrived back at the Plaza Mayor. On the way back to the house, we passed someone I recognised, the guy who had given me the flyer the day before. He didn't notice me, probably because he was with a beautiful woman with an amazing figure and long dark wavy hair. They were clearly together, they couldn't seem to take their eyes off each other, but it didn't matter now because I had Julian and he was going to help to make everything okay. When we were walking, I remembered that I had thought he might have been crying in the cathedral, and I asked him who he'd been lighting a candle for. He said that it was for his girlfriend who had died, but that he didn't want to talk about it yet because it wasn't the right time. I wanted to know more but decided not to push it because I didn't want to upset him. I thought how tragic it must have been for him to lose someone he was in love with, and wondered whether she had been ill or whether it had been some kind of accident. It must have been awful for him. Maybe that's why he'd been so understanding about what had happened to me. We arrived at the apartment and I couldn't help shivering as I walked through the door, but everything seemed quiet and still. It struck me as an eerie stillness rather than a peaceful one. But that was no surprise after what had happened here, and I thought that it wouldn't matter anyway because I would be gone soon, and this time forever. Well, I was certainly right about that, but not in the way I thought. We went into the living room and sat down. I couldn't offer him anything to drink, but it wouldn't matter if we weren't going to be here for long. I meant to just get the notebook straight away so that we could leave, but somehow we started talking. Julian asked me some question that I can't even remember, and before I knew it, I was talking about my mum and dad, growing up, even telling him things I'd completely forgotten up until that moment, like Stephanie Maitland from the year above hiding spiders in my bed when I was at boarding school, and all the other girls laughing at me when I screamed. Somehow, hours must have passed. I only noticed how dark it had become when Julian got up to switch on the lights. We had been talking for so long, I had anyway, and I suddenly felt exhausted. I told Julian that I needed to get back to the hotel and we could take the notebooks with us and look at them tomorrow. I was almost too tired even to go through to the bedroom to get them. I couldn't work out what was wrong with me. I went through and picked them up, and when I handed them to Julian, he opened the first one and started to read it silently. I didn't want to interrupt him, but after a few minutes he still hadn't said anything, and I was so desperate to know what was in them, as well as to get back to the hotel so that I could sleep, that I had to stop him to ask if he had found anything. He said that he needed to read to the end before he could really understand what it was about, and that I needed to sleep, but he would read them overnight, and then in the morning we could talk about what they said. I wanted to go back to the hotel, but I was so tired, and Julian suggested that I could just sleep here, and he would make sure nothing happened. He said that he wouldn't sleep anyway because he'd be reading the notebooks, so I didn't need to worry about anything happening. Maybe I was just too tired to argue, or maybe I really did trust him, that things would be fine, but I got straight into bed, and before I knew it, I was asleep.